So we'll be starting here in about 1 minute.
Well, good evening. Thank you all so much for coming out. My name is Jeff Hunt. I'm the Vice President of Public Policy for Colorado Christian University and Director of our think tank here named the Centennial Institute. I am so grateful that you are joining us here this evening. The issue of religious freedom is very important, and I am grateful that the Fireline Coalition has chosen to host their event here at Colorado Christian University. To introduce our speakers, please welcome the co-founder of Fireline Coalition, Brad Bergford.
Good evening. I'm Brad Bergford. I'm an attorney, and I'm here on behalf of Fireline Coalition. Fireline Coalition is a collective voice of organizations and community leaders in support of religious liberty. The coalition presents this debate, which is its first public event, as part of its effort to provide education and clarity regarding some of the prevalent thinking on religious liberty and its interplay with various laws and cultural mores. In particular, we will address religious liberty in the context of government, the military, public accommodations laws, and the First Amendment. We want the public to leave this debate well-informed on issues that can arise when religious liberty and other rights collide. Our debate moderators are Dan Kaplis and Debbie Chavez. Dan Kaplis is the founder of the law offices of Daniel J. Kaplis, LLC. He graduated with honors from the University of Colorado, where he served as student body president and was the National Evans Scholar of the Year. Dan also earned his Juris Doctor degree from the University of Colorado School of Law. Mr. Kaplis is a respected legal analyst who has been quoted by many prominent media outlets, including the Washington Post, New York Times, CNN, and NBC News. Mr. Kaplis has also been a regular guest on national interview shows, such as Larry King Live and The O'Reilly Factor, and he hosts the aptly named Dan Kaplis Show weekdays from 9 to 11 a.m. on Denver's AM 710 KNUS. Debbie Chavez is Executive Director of Colorado Family Action and CFA Foundation, and she's a founding member of Fireline Coalition, which is the organization that presents this evening's event. Debbie works to educate citizens in a better understanding of state and local government affairs and is a respected public speaker engaging all sectors of society to invest in the betterment of their communities. Because of Ms. Chavez's leadership, she was invited to a White House reception for Women's History Month with the President, First Lady, Vice President, and female cabinet secretaries. Let's give both of our moderators a hand. I would also like to introduce our debaters. They are Theresa Sidebotham, who is directly to my left. To her left is Alex McFarland. Over here we have Mikey Weinstein and Scott Moss. I'll begin with Theresa Sidebotham. She's the founder of Telios Law PLLC and practices religious law, litigation, appellate law, and civil rights law. She especially focuses on First Amendment and religious liberties issues. Ms. Sidebotham represents religious organizations nationally and internationally on First Amendment issues, policy issues, employment law, and investigations, and employment law and investigations, historic and current. She graduated summa cum laude from Wheaton College and first in her class from University of Denver Sturm College of Law. Mrs. Sidebotham was recently honored as a super lawyer and received a Martindale-Hubbell AV preeminent rating. She is married to Colonel Bruce T. Sidebotham, chaplain, U.S. Army Reserves, and they have 4 sons. I will next introduce Mr. Mikey Weinstein. He's a 1977 honor graduate of the United States Air Force Academy, a former USAF Judge Advocate General. Mikey also worked as legal counsel in the Reagan White House and as general counsel for the 2-time former presidential candidate H. Ross Perot. He has appeared on numerous TV news and radio networks. His constitutional activism has been covered extensively in the print media, and including the Associated Press, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, and many others, including Time Magazine. Mikey founded the Military Religious Freedom Foundation to directly battle the far-right militant radical evangelical religious fundamentalists. MRFF has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize 7 times. Mr. Weinstein has also written 2 books, one, With God on Our Side, One Man's War Against an Evangelical Coup in America's Military, and secondly, No Snowflake in an Avalanche, the Military Religious Freedom Foundation, its battle to defend the Constitution, and one family's courageous war against religious extremism in high places. He and his wife of 39 years, Bonnie, have 3 children and 1 grandchild, and I'd like to wish a special happy birthday to Mr. Weinstein. I didn't ask him how many it is, but we certainly wish you the warmest of greetings on your birthday. Next, I'd like to introduce Mr. Alex McFarland on the far left, my far left, you're right. He's one of the country's foremost apologists, and he hosts the American Family Radio Network's Exploring the World and the weekly television program Viral Truth on the National Religious Broadcasters Network. He's authored 18 books, including Stand Strong, America, The God You Thought You Knew, 10 Questions Every Christian Must Answer, 10 Answers for Skeptics, 10 Answers for Atheists, and many more. Mr. McFarland also serves as Director for Christian Worldview and Apologetics at the Christian Worldview Center of North Greenville University in Greenville, South Carolina, has spoken in all 50 states, has been interviewed by top Christian and secular media outlets, and has spent decades training teens and adults in biblical worldview reasoning. Lastly, to my far right, your far left, Scott Moss teaches and researches constitutional law, employment law and discrimination, and federal litigation at the University of Colorado School of Law. Previously, he spent years litigating individual and class action employment cases. He still litigates, including at trial and on appeal in Colorado state and federal courts, as well as elsewhere, a range of claims including the following in recent years: election-related First Amendment speech claims, discrimination and unpaid wage employment claims, defamation and related claims arising from spousal abuse allegations, and various commercial claims including securities fraud, fiduciary duty breach, and legal malpractice. He has also served as a Boulder County hearing officer, reviewing challenged employment decision-making. In perhaps his favorite litigation experience, he personally served a complaint on an elusive defendant by posing as a flower delivery person, long-stemmed rose in hand. Please welcome all of our debaters. There's certainly much more that could be said about the resumes of each of the debaters. What I've offered is truly a thumbnail sketch at best. They are all extremely prominent in their respective arenas, but time dictates that we move ahead with the debate. I emphasize that this debate will be conducted with respect toward all participants and audience members. The debaters are committed to avoiding personal attacks, and we expect an attitude of decorum from everyone who is here tonight. Any person who fails to adhere to this standard will be removed. Debate moderator Debbie Chavez will now read the rules of the debate.
This event is sponsored by the Fireline Coalition, a Colorado collective voice of organizations and community leaders in support of religious freedom. This is a nonpartisan event intended to further the discussion on religious liberty as it pertains to the state of Colorado and the nation. There will be an approximate 80-minute debate. By virtue of his or her participation in this debate, each debater agrees to these rules. The debate will cover 4 topic areas this evening: government, military, public accommodation, First Amendment free exercise, and establishment clauses. You have been provided cards to write questions in your audience seat, and when you write those questions, they can be picked up by a volunteer along the side aisles. Please feel free to raise your card in the air, and volunteers will pick those up. Those cards will be placed in bags according to their topic. As moderators, Mr. Kaplis and I will be alternating asking questions. We will draw 3 cards from each bag and choose one of those cards to ask a question. Time allowing, we will ask more than one question on that topic at that time. Debate attendees will be provided topic labeled question cards, which you have been, and the question cards, as they are collected, will stop being collected at 8:15. So please, as you fill them out, raise your hand so your card may be collected. Now, based on the number of cards and the time limitations, we may not, actually we will not, get to all of the questions, but we appreciate your participation. Debate teams may decide amongst themselves who will answer the question that is asked, and then the opposing team will decide amongst themselves who will answer the response. Each debater will be given 2 minutes at the close to give closing statements and 6 minutes at the start to give opening statements. Each debate question will have 3 minutes in response time. We have a timer that will be showing you the time limits, and we ask that you please respect the time as you are giving your answer. Thank you. And we will start with our debate opening, and we will have Mr. Weinstein open with his opening remarks, and you will have 6 minutes.
Can you all hear me out there? No. Okay. How do you do it? Is it on?
It's on.
Okay. I'm 32 years old today, so I know that was something that was on your minds. I'm going to give you a quick synopsis of the Military Religious Freedom Foundation and then tell you why I'm so happy to be here tonight. Scott and I are clearly the visiting team. The venue, the moderators, and the sponsors are probably not going to share our particular worldview, but let me just explain that, look, our country is about, 80 days past the inauguration. There's a gigantic bleeding chasm in this country between 2 different competing worldviews, and if I could ask one favor of all of you, if you could look to your right and look at that person, and then look to your left. Do it real quickly, just please. Well, that's power. I love this microphone, but I don't know if you know the person to your left or right, but the bottom line is that we're all Americans, and I'm happy to be here. There's probably very little about that most of us will necessarily all agree on when it comes to the 3 topics you never discuss at a dinner party. You know, religion, sex, and politics, and baby, we're going to get into that tonight. So I think it's great that we can be together. It's been said that democracy is noisy and messy, and it also is not a spectator sport, as Bernie Sanders would always say. And so we're here tonight in an effort. I'm not going to try to convince you that you need to accept my view or Scott's view or whatever, but I think it's useful because some of you may only eat at one particular type of cafeteria and get one food on Wednesday nights and Saturdays and Sundays, and it's useful just to hear where someone else is coming from. Whether you agree with it or not, information is inherently better than no information. I have a foundation that I founded. We have 345 people in the foundation, and like many civil rights advocacy groups, many of them are full-time volunteers. About 80% or more are practicing Protestants and Roman Catholics. The Military Religious Freedom Foundation currently represents 50,352 members of the U.S. military and veterans. Sailors, soldiers, Marines, and Airmen, National Guard, Reserve, cadets, and midshipmen at Annapolis, West Point, and the Air Force Academy, of course, in ROTC and OCS and OTS, and veterans. Listen carefully, please. About 96% of our clients are practicing Christians. You know, there's between 36,000 to 41,000 different distinct denominations of Christianity out there. We represent 24 different varieties of Baptists alone. So the concept of being anti-Christian obviously is something that's very upsetting to us. We are the Christians that we represent, just like the 18% of all Muslim Americans in the military that we represent, and the just under 1,000 LGBTQ members of the military that we represent. We're all human beings. And so I hope it's going to be useful to hear a different viewpoint. For those that, I know that we have some folks out here, I know for a fact that have come from our particular worldview, and I think it'll be helpful for them to hear that. And I commend the college or the university and Fireline for opening a dialogue like this. If we can't do it now, I mean, let's face it, it's been tough For those of us that didn't expect Hillary to lose on November 8th, it's been hard. For those of us that have watched Trump in there, it's been difficult. And we do have something called a U.S. Constitution in this country, which is what I think makes this country incredibly beautiful. I happen to be Jewish. I'm not very religious, but Israel has no constitution. There is no separation between synagogue and state there. And I was watching some videos on Theresa to try to get up to speed, and I watched a very nice presentation she made about 5 years ago. I think it was at Colorado College, an ACLU winter event. And of the stuff I watched, she said something that really stuck out to me, kind of like my favorite phrase is a tarantula on a wedding cake. She said, "What do you think that we evangelicals are afraid of?" And she said, we're afraid that our voice is going to be silenced from the public square. And if you don't know, she grew up in a predominantly Muslim country and faced prejudice for being a Christian. And I looked at that and I was just astonished, because what we're trying to do is not to eliminate someone talking to you at, in Smith's or Albertsons or at a Rockies game or whatever. We certainly are going to have differences about whether or not you can put up a Ten Commandment rock in front of the courthouse. But there's got to be common ground for us as fellow Americans. Most of you are probably from Colorado. I know a number of you who support us have come from out of state. And I know that we have incredible members of the U.S. military that are here. Our foundation represents over 700 military members that are at Fort Carson, the Air Force Academy, Schriever Air Force Base, Peterson Air Force Base, and NORAD. And even though you may not know who they are, if we could have a hand for them right now, I'd sure appreciate that. So the one thing that I would ask tonight is that just be open, and I'm going to celebrate my 40th wedding anniversary, which is amazing since I'm just 32, on June 3rd, and my wife keeps reminding me how important it is to listen. I do talk a lot, but try to listen very much, not so much to necessarily what is said, but how the person is saying it. And that's why I watched the videotapes of Theresa enough. I couldn't find any of Alex. But I actually, it made an impact upon me, and I could see what she was saying when she talked about her family, when she talked about some of the bullying her kids had been through. We're all human beings, and in the last 19 seconds I've got here, let's have a good experience tonight where we are sharing information, we are listening to the other person, and whether you like it or not, that it doesn't matter. It's just at least being exposed and think about it a little bit. I'm coming here open-minded, and I surely hope that you are. Thank you for all having the courage and intrepid integrity to come out here tonight on a Tuesday night. Thank you very much.
And we will have Theresa Sidebotham for 6 minutes.
America's pluralism and religious liberty was a unique, radical experiment. Part of what we're debating is whether we can keep that diversity. So let's ask, what is religion and why does it matter? Most of the world and most of history and most of America believes that a spiritual realm exists and that a supreme being makes demands on our behavior. Religion is man's effort, a little closer, to make sense of the spiritual world and those demands. What effect does religion have on our society? Religious people do the heavy lifting in disaster relief, community development, and social justice. And yes, religious people take moral stands. The broader society has rejected some of their views, like drinking and dancing, and come to agree with others, like slavery or smoking. Today, religion contributes $1.2 trillion a year to the economy. Highly religious people give more money and do far more volunteer work than others. If religious social work were to shut down, it would cripple the government. As a religious person, I believe we need religious freedom to follow God. But here are 3 secular reasons for giving religion room to breathe. First, we can't have true diversity without diversity of thought and viewpoint. Shutting points of view out of the public square ends the American experiment. Second, the conscience of the religious has always informed the public conscience, which in turn is silenced at the beginning of totalitarian regimes. Third, the conscience of the individual is at the core of that person's integrity. once the conscience is violated, even if the person is wrong, that core is broken. So our goal should be to let each person live according to his or her deepest held convictions, except where that would cause serious harm. So let's turn to some areas where this plays out. Religious liberty in the government. Let's take a public school for a government setting. Schools have a captive audience of impressionable minors. So teachers keep their free exercise rights in private life or to speak of their faith with colleagues and supervisors. But the government can tell teachers to refrain from religious speech in the classroom because the school doesn't want to endorse religion. Students, on the other hand, generally have free speech. They can pray and distribute religious material as long as it's not school-sponsored. And students can't be forced to violate their conscience, as the Supreme Court said about Jehovah's Witnesses students who didn't want to take the Pledge of Allegiance. Religious liberty in the military. So military is 24/7. The personnel are often not free to leave base, or they're stationed in countries of different majority faiths. They face injury, even death in combat. To support free exercise, the military has chaplains drawn from different faiths. Chaplains preach and counsel freely according to their beliefs without government interference. They provide support for other free exercise. They can advise commanders on the impact of religion in the unit or the area of operations. Military personnel can participate voluntarily in services. They can wear religious apparel like crosses or yarmulkes and speak of their religious beliefs. While free exercise can be limited if there's an adverse impact on military readiness, unit cohesion, or good order, this is a fairly high bar related to harassment or coercion of other personnel. Religious liberty in public accommodations. First, I'd like to note that non-discrimination laws have not historically been absolutes. Zero-tolerance non-discrimination has never been the model. Non-discrimination laws have hundreds of exemptions, accommodations, and balancing tests built in. Non-discrimination should allow for a balancing of interest, letting people live according to their deepest convictions and protecting diversity. So how should that play out in cases of civil rights conflict, such as whether a baker or photographer must participate in a gay wedding? If you protect diversity and everyone's deepest convictions, the gay couple can still get their wedding, but the individual artist should be able to not participate unless it keeps the gay couple from getting their wedding. Forcing people to either violate their own conscience or to leave their livelihoods is not consistent with American diversity. A view that balances civil rights, for instance, gay rights and religious liberties rights, allows us to have genuine diversity in the public square. Can religious views still have a place in the public square if they contradict majority views? Yes, because we need voices of conscience and citizens who follow their conscience. Tolerating only popular consensus is not really diversity at all. The greatness of America has been based on the freedom to disagree. If views are right, they'll prevail. If they're wrong, they'll fade away. So we ask, is our society going to be free and open? Is it going to be really diverse?
Thank you, and I'll give a reminder before we go to our next speaker. If you have a question that you have written down, please raise your hand with that question and we'll have a volunteer pick that up. If you need a card and a pen to write a question, please also raise your hand. And Mr. Moss, we would like to have you give your 6-minute address. Thank you for your patience. We don't have sound yet on Mr. Moss's microphone. Tell you what, I'm going to pass mine down to you. We'll start that time over, please.
I'm sure they weren't deliberately silencing you.
It's already starting.
Okay. So thank you all for coming, especially since I know that most of you aren't on my side of many of these issues, but I'm used to that, and that's okay, and that's a good thing. I regularly do debates sponsored by conservative groups at my school where I teach. I've even done a gay marriage debate at a Catholic school, the one that employed me before I had tenure. So I've been through worse. And I also work across the aisle as a lawyer. I've done legal work for members of other religions and ideologies, defending them against attacks on their faith and their expression. Twice in the past year, I've enjoyed working on such causes with evangelical and politically conservative lawyers and political figures. And that's a good thing. We can disagree on what's important to us, but also work together on other things that are important to us. So my view on cases that are specific, like the Christian owner of the Masterpiece Cake Shop, found to have discriminated against a gay couple getting married, we'll get into in more depth. My short version of the view is that there's, of course, a right to one's speech, faith, and art, but public accommodation law in the civil rights laws draws a line. When you open your doors to the public to sell goods and services, you're engaged in commerce, and you can't discriminate as to commerce. But we can get more into that. But the tough question is drawing the line, and I get that that can be tricky, so I'd like some audience participation now. Don't worry, I'm not like the law professors in the movies who yell at you that you'll get it wrong and you'll never be a lawyer or whatever. So I just need some simple yeses and shows of hands. So there's been talk of cakes, but there's another setting. We all saw that video about United Airlines, with controversy about religious expression, air travel. And that's a setting where you're in close quarters with strangers, don't know each other's views. My main question is about prayer on an airline. So maybe during takeoff or turbulence, maybe you just wanted to pray at the moment. Have any of you engaged in prayer on an airline? I don't mean just in your head, but I mean in some way that can be noticed, either whispering, speaking, or holding your hands together. Please raise your hand. I won't call on you if you or a family member have ever prayed on an airplane in a way others could notice. Yeah, it's about half. Okay, so let's say airline staff said, we got a complaint. Another paying passenger feels uncomfortable because you were praying, so you need to get off this plane. So you can vote here whether or not you've prayed on a plane. How many of you think that someone who's praying should have a right to stay on the plane? Okay, so there are things we have consensus on in America and in life. That's nice. Okay, I agree with you on that. So one more related question. There have been criticisms or calls for boycotts at times of TV or radio shows that disrespect one's rights or faith. Assume a talk show host argued he'd be uncomfortable with prayer on a plane, so if someone is praying aloud before takeoff, the airline must remove that person. Raise your hand if you would support a boycott or at least public admonishing of that talk show host for his hostility to religious expression. Okay, so maybe there's the right to say it. Maybe there's not basis for that. In fact, this actually happened. This was an example. There was a host of a talk show in Colorado, conservative host listened to by conservatives, who said this: if I'm sitting on an airplane and there's someone who looks like one of the 9/11 hijackers and they are sitting there praying out loud as we taxi, that airline darn well better remove that person. He didn't say kick off anyone doing something hinting at hijacking. He said kick off anyone praying if they resemble Middle Eastern hijackers. And more broadly, we've seen and heard a lot of discrimination against Muslims in America at U.S. Customs, in workplaces, in fury shared by almost all on the right about plans to have a Muslim community center with, to be sure, places for prayer, but also a fitness center, a swimming pool, in Lower Manhattan, because Lower Manhattan, due to 9/11, has to be off limits to Muslims, or at least to places they congregate and might pray or be Muslim. So said virtually all of the political right, including religious conservatives. So where was the outcry, I want to know? From those like Dr. McFarland here, whose website stresses his belief in the right to exercise faith in public. Faith in public is the thing. Where was the call for a boycott or even just criticism from Christian groups who regularly go after hostility to religious faith? Focus on the Family, a sponsor of this event, spent years pressing a boycott of Disney. Just 2 years before that Colorado talk show, and not long after the Muslim Community Center controversy, the American Family Association pressed a boycott of companies merely advertising on TV shows with gay characters like Will and Grace. And the Colorado Family Action Group, another sponsor of this event, posted on his website a call to boycott Target over transgender folks using bathrooms. If you're outraged by disrespecting the right not to sell a cake, here we had someone of influence calling for something clearly worse, kicking you out just for praying by yourself. And there's no call for boycott, That talk show host remained the toast of the town. He's still invited by leading Christian institutions to MC high-profile events like this one. That host was Dan Kaplis, our moderator tonight. So my challenge to my opponents, and to those in the audience more of that persuasion, is you need to show some basic consistency here of a sort that I've not honestly seen from many on that side. If you really mean what you want is the right to express your faith, I'll stand with you. I'm your brother, I'll be your lawyer. But if your understanding of religious freedom is Christians get to kick gays out of their stores and kick Muslims off planes, then you're doing it wrong. Or really what you're describing isn't religious freedom, it's rights for me but not for thee, which is not how the Constitution works, at least not the American one. So I look forward tonight and in the future to hearing which it is you want. Religious freedom of all, or just using the law as a convenient, inconsistent weapon to get your religion special treatment, to inject it into government as the favorite state religion, and to punish others for not agreeing to your religion. Thank you.
Somebody turn this on for a second.
Thank you, Mr. Moss. And we will go to Mr. McFarland.
Could I say something quickly? Because I think I heard my name invoked over here.
He's not one of the debaters.
We
Yes.
have moderator rebuttal now? Did the Muslims get rebuttal?
Actually, I think we're going to go ahead and go to Mr. McFarland and let him introduce himself, and then we'll start with the questions.
Do I have mic? Am I on? Not on yet. Testing 1, 2, 3.
I have a popular mic. I'm going to pass it on over. Are we good?
How about now? Well, I want to say it is really, really an honor to be here, and I want to thank Colorado Christian University and the Colorado Family Policy Council and all the people that have helped organize this and sponsor it. I want to thank the people on the platform for being here. I do want to say happy birthday to Mikey, and it's an honor to meet you, and happy 32nd. If there's anything I've learned in my 29 years, it's that conversation is a good thing. But I want to thank all of you all for being here, and I agree with what Mikey said, that we need conversation. And while I passionately do love God and country, I will equally passionately defend your right to disagree with me. And one thing that I want to say, I can't speak unequivocally on behalf of Christians everywhere, but the Lord has allowed me to speak in about 1,700 churches of all strata and a couple of hundred universities. I think that Christians, at least the ones that I've interacted with, which have been many throughout all 50 states and many foreign countries, we want the right, which we believe is a constitutionally guaranteed right, to freely express our religious convictions, to freely act on and live out our moral convictions. But we don't want to create a theocracy. We don't want to cram religion down anybody's throat. Christians don't want to force anybody to believe, because in reality, you can't do that. Christianity is about a relationship between a person and Christ, whom we believe is the fulfillment of the Scriptures, the Messiah. But what I want to set forth tonight is this. I want to set forth the idea that religion has been a part of our nation from the very beginning. Freedom of religious expression is part of what makes our nation great. And the curtailing, if not elimination, of the free expression of religion endangers not only individual freedoms, but the Constitution itself. So what I want to do in the brief amount of time I've got left, I want to talk about 4 areas that would constitute an argument for the free expression of religion. Number 1, by historical precedent. Number 2, by constitutional guarantee. Number 3, by uniform affirmation. And number 4, by future repercussions if this religious freedom is lost. Now, follow me here for a second. By historical precedent, our nation was founded on belief in God and belief in objective morality. Now, another thought that I hope we can get into tonight is the idea that religion and morality are 2 different things. The Establishment Clause of the First Amendment has been taken largely in the last 60-plus years since Everson versus the Board of Education to mean that the government's non-establishment of religion must also antecedently mean the abolishment of morality. Now, we're to the point in our nation, and this really, I know as a person who works with young people extensively, the belief that there are no moral boundaries, the belief that there are no moral parameters in all of life, there are no ethical boundaries that any of us have to acknowledge, has created really kind of a militant autonomy. I don't answer to you, I don't answer to anybody, I don't answer to God. And in our quest to not impinge on anybody's freedom of religion, the result has been an abolition of belief in morality. Another story for a few moments down the road. But by historical precedent, the founders predicated the validity of the revolution on there being a God and there being moral truth. And Britain had violated our rights, and if we didn't stand up as a nation, the colonists would be complicit with Britain's offenses. And that's why they said appealing to God for the rectitude of our intentions. In other words, the founders were saying, if we're in the wrong, we'll answer to God for it. And that's why people like JFK, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Chief Justice Earl Warren in 1954, President Harry Truman, they all would say, along with Madison and Jefferson and Fisher Ames, who wrote the First Amendment, they all would say that religion is a part of our DNA. By constitutional guarantee, Declaration, Constitution, Bill of Rights, all defend our inalienable rights based on the fact that there's a God from whom those rights descend. And inalienable means sometimes rendered inalienable or unalienable. They can't be taken away, at least not legitimately. And I would surmise that what the Constitution doesn't promise to protect is that we'll never hear speech or things that we find offensive. In Mikey's book, which I read today when I found it very interesting, I understand in your book there have been times that both you and your son were witnessed to by Christians in a very non-polite, offensive way, and for that I'm sorry. As a Christian and as a minister, I would never advocate that a non-believer be treated abrasively or in a demeaning, degrading way, and I'm sorry that apparently some of the Christians you've encountered along the journey of life have been rather unseemly, and I regret that, and maybe moving forward you can encounter Christians and a witness of the gospel that's a little more appealing. But by historical precedent and by constitutional guarantee, we have the right of religious expression. By uniform affirmation, and I could quote everybody from Reagan, I could quote Saul Bloom, who was the president of the sesquicentennial Convention on the Constitution, and his writing of the Constitution is called a classic by political science leaders, that our Constitution and historical leaders have affirmed our freedom of religion. The last thought in the 9 seconds I have left is, if we lose Christianity in the public square, one of two things will fill the void: socialism or Sharia, neither of which we want.
Thank you, Mr. McFarland. As we begin tonight with questions, Mr. Kaplis will be drawing 3 questions out of one of his bags and choose one of those 3. We are tonight sticking to the topics of government, military, public accommodation, and First Amendment free exercise and establishment clauses. I will remind all of the debaters as we answer questions, we are not addressing personal attacks at other debaters. We will be addressing the questions that are asked. Thank you.
And that's a perfect lead-in to a point I'd like to make. Scott, I apologize. I can't hear you that well because of the way the speakers face out, but I think Scott attributed certain quotes to me from, I think that's what you were saying, Scott. And I just want to let you know, from what I could make out, don't take that at face value. Normally when the left quotes me, it does so inaccurately. But if you want to have that conversation, I'm happy to. So first question, and this first question will go to Scott. What is your opinion regarding First Amendment rights for students in public schools?
Actually, and I'll clarify that the teams will, among themselves, decide who will answer the question, and you'll have 3 minutes to answer that question.
Sure. I think of myself as a strong supporter of students' First Amendment rights. I learned my first case site in 1988 when I was 15. West Virginia Board of Education, 1943. It's the one that says you have the right not to do the pledge. And I'd done some reading about it for a social studies project, and a friend whose religion was Jainism, a non-theistic religion, was troubled by the under God part. So one day, he wasn't going to stand up when the pledge was done. Our teacher, who was a Korean War veteran, was extremely upset. I sat down with Neil. I said, West Virginia Board of Education versus Barnett, 1943. He has the right to sit down. Teacher backed off quite angrily. I don't know, maybe that's why I never became a physicist, or it could be my utter lack of talent in physics. Either way. But I thought the law is powerful in protecting rights, speech and religious alike. And in a way, most religious rights all overlap with speech rights because it's about expression, it's about belief, it's about faith. I would agree with my other panelists at the debate on a great many things. So, for example, every now and then you hear something like, write at school about someone you admire, and some student will be disallowed to write about Jesus. I think I've heard that in a news report. I would strongly support the right to do that. My 8-year-old's a big fan of Bernie Sanders, and if he wanted to write about Bernie, that's okay. And if someone wants to write about a different socialist Jew who expressed a great deal about the poor and nothing at all about being gay, they have a right to do that. So I would strongly support the right to express your religion in any context in which you can make it clear it's your expression and religion cannot be disfavored. If you can speak on any topic you favor, if you can put whatever you want on your locker, political or social or cultural, if I can have a picture of Justin Bieber or Donald Trump on my locker, I can have a picture of Jesus too. So I'm strongly in favor of those kinds of rights. The only thing that I think goes over the line, and this is the line the Supreme Court's drawn, including by Justice Kennedy, Justice O'Connor, some others, folks who may be to the left of some here, but not the left of American politics, is that where the speech is reasonably viewed as endorsed by the school, so a prayer that is put on stage as sponsored by the school, that's where it crosses the line, because the government shouldn't be endorsing any particular religion over another. Because after all, I think there are all sorts of settings in America around the world where it doesn't work out well for anyone, including Christians, Jews, Muslims, people of no particular religion whatsoever, if the government can endorse whatever is the majority religion there. There should be no endorsement. So I guess I'm agreeing with basic Supreme Court law, but I'll go as far as to say that I would construe broadly with great concern anything that could reasonably be construed as endorsement. There's some blurry line there I'll get, but I would strongly support the right to express yourself religiously. There is no ability of anyone in any school to treat religion any worse than any other expression.
Theresa, who from your side?
So Mr. Moss has laid that out pretty clearly. That's the basic constitutional law and student free speech in the public schools, and you know, we're in agreement on that. So I would just like to add briefly, we still need to be sensitive and considerate about the religious and free speech issues in the public schools, especially where there's a strong majority. So, for instance, some of my Jewish friends have commented that at times they've felt disrespected if Yom Kippur's not honored, some of their religious practices. I think some of our Muslim friends probably feel the same way with some of their practices. And so as we advocate for free speech and religion for our kids in the public school, let's remember all of the kids and whether their rights are also being honored, and just make sure that we're really having that diverse environment where everyone's getting honored. And that's really all I've got to say on that.
And we have some extra time on your side. Alex, do you have anything to add to that?
Oh, thank you. A couple of people are here that have helped me write some of the books that I've been privileged to write, one of which is a book called Stand Strong in College. During the writing of this book, I interviewed 24 college professors across about 22 states, and I interviewed about 243 college students. And over, college professors at public universities like UNC Chapel Hill and University of San Diego and Texas A&M, they would nervously look at me and they would say, look, I can't talk on campus, but meet me at Starbucks. It's position in the department, it's tenure, it's grant money. I'm a Christian, I'm a believer, but I dare not say that on campus. And in several other books we've written, we've talked to students that were marginalized because they wrote papers that dealt with things like the history of Christianity or the impact of Christianity in the Western world. And they have been docked by even quoting people like Pulitzer nominee Rodney Stark, who's been an advocate for teaching about the history and the impact of Christianity. So I would say this: selective tolerance is intolerance. On 2 occasions, I have been disinvited from universities to speak, and it's not that big of a deal. I do a lot of speaking. My point is, though, while every manner of belief system you can think of is allowed to have a voice in the public school and at public universities. Very often, clubs that happen to be Christian, that have gone through all of the proper channels, are not allowed to have evangelical speakers, or at least not allowed to have certain types of voices. And the educational system, we call it a university, but because of the curtailing of our religious freedoms, it's become a monoversity. And this is not good.
Time. Thank you so much. And now we will start with the team on my left. And we are still in the topic of First Amendment. It appears that these laws are not applied equally. For example, Muslims having a separate prayer room in a school, whereas Christian students aren't allowed to have a place for a Bible study. Please decide which one will reply.
I think it's true that sometimes the laws are not applied equally. I don't think it's absolutely consistent when the laws are not applied equally. I mean, it's pretty environment specific, if you will. So in one case, one group might be favored, in another case, another group might be favored. I think frequently school officials maybe don't have a clear understanding of what they actually are allowed to promote or tolerate or permit. So there can be a lot of different reasons. We're Americans together, and religious freedom is important for all of us. And I think we need to own it whenever it happens, whether we happen to have exactly the same point of view as the person who's getting persecuted at the moment or not. Because if some of us lose our freedom, all of us lose our freedom.
Let me say the preamble to the Constitution includes the words that the Constitution was being established to, quote, promote the general welfare. I believe God has given the human race two engines to immeasurably promote the general welfare. One, I believe, is the church, but the other that we all experience is family, the home. In the last 40 years plus, we've witnessed an unparalleled unraveling of the family, not only in America, but in the West in general. And I happen to know, not only by research, but by interaction, yes, as an academic, but as a pastor with hundreds and maybe thousands of young people over the last 30 years, how the erosion of the family has caused so much, or created so much of a void. I recently had a meeting with the head of philanthropic giving for Bank of America, one of the major corporations in Charlotte, North Carolina, employing 18,000 people. And they want to know, along with other major corporations, how can we restore the family? Because the bank, it's not that they've all of a sudden got religion or caring about sectarian things, but they know that the best promotion of a prosperous, safe, stable society where people do things like get mortgages and invest is when there is a strong foundation called the home. We are witnessing, and I don't say this that we would denigrate any non-believer or take away anybody's right to disbelieve, but we're witnessing the unraveling of our country because of the curtailing of religious expression and religious freedom and the breakdown of the family. And there are several ways to approach family. Sociologist David Goldberg, in his book, How Civilizations Die, we can look at family either by conviction or by pragmatism. And the one way that we can begin to restore our family and restore our nation is to talk about the origin of it all, God, the morality.
And that is time. And on my right, I'll read the question again, and then we will start the 3 minutes. It appears.
I don't need it.
Oh, great.
I got it. Alex and Theresa and my friends out there that are believers, let me ask you all a question out there. What is the first commandment? You can't have any other gods but me. What does the First Amendment say? Oh, yes, you can. I get sick to my stomach. My daughter said to be nice, so let me just, with the concept that morality is equatable to religion, and by religion we mean by default Christianity. There are two types of basic Christians that are out there, and they're both with us today. Great Commission Christians, Mark 16:15, Matthew 28:19. One of the last things Jesus is supposed to have said to his disciples, go and make disciples of all nations. And Great Commandment Christians, and they look at the Sermon on the Mount in the book of Matthew where Jesus says two things: love the Lord your God with all your mind, soul, and heart, and then basically recites the golden rule: treat others the way you want to be treated, which predated Jesus in the Tanakh, or the 5 books of Moses, the Torah, and predated Jews and Hebrews in the Code of Hammurabi. So the problem we've got is that the Great Commission says go out and get people into the faith, and it battles the Great Constitution. Ultimately, we also have 2 different tremendous views. I know one of the people watching tonight is my research director, Chris Rada, who directly battles David Barton, and we do not agree with your view of history of the Founding Fathers. With all due respect, it's very, very, very different, and we find it incredibly insulting to presume that you have to have a faith in some sort of a spirit that you can't see or touch or feel nominally in order to be a good person. We reject that out of whole cloth without trying to be insulting. One of our big cases that is never talked about is we had a sergeant at a major U.S. Air Force base who was an evangelical Christian, horribly offended because his commander put a bumper sticker on his car, the commander's, that had the Christian fish symbol with the word Satan inside of it. And it was an attempt to be, he was a very open, very evangelizing atheist as a commander. So the sergeant went to the chaplains who said, I'm going to contact the Military Religious Freedom Foundation. They were stunned, like, oh my God, Weinstein and his foundation eat Christians for breakfast. Well, he gave us a chance. We jumped right in there because that was absolutely wrong. Now, the military is a completely different adversarial, communal, ritualistic, tribal society. It is covered by a separate criminal code. There is a Supreme Court case called Parker versus Levy that makes it very clear, and Theresa touched on it a little bit but did not really do justice to it with regard to the fact that you do not have the same panoply at all of First Amendment rights to include religious expression and freedom rights when you wear the uniform, as opposed to us here tonight. But what I'm trying to say is ask yourself which type of Christian you are. If you are a Christian, are you Great Commandment or Great Commission? And there have to be time, place, and limit restrictions on everything. I mean, you can't scream fire in a crowded theater, and sometimes you can't scream Jesus in a crowded theater. So that's all I wanted to say on that. Thank you.
But you can scream Jesus in a crowded theater that's on fire, right? Just perfect segue into the military. Mikey, we'll start with your side. If it's well established that military and government employees cannot publicly support a particular political party or candidate, why should commanders be allowed to share their religious perspectives with other members of the military?
Do you mind if I know something about this? And it is not allowed. It is not allowed. Just like, your military superior, can I see a show of hands from anyone who's a veteran or is currently on active duty? Thank you very much for one thing. Thank you very, very much. We all know that your military superior is not your shift manager at Starbucks. In the United States military, I told you we're going to talk about sex. Having sexual intercourse with someone other than your spouse, adultery, is often prosecuted as a felony. If you're ordered to go to the base dentist at 1600 hours or 4 p.m., and you don't go, failure to go can be a crime under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It's a completely different system. The bone, the muscle, the sinew, the veins, the arteries, the flesh of the U.S. military is good order, morale, discipline, unit cohesion, health and safety of the troops, mission accomplishment, military readiness. And our Supreme Court has ruled on this, and not some left-wing radical on the court, but Justice Rehnquist, one of the most conservative Chief Justices in American history, in a 6-2 decision, made it very clear that the compelling governmental interest in the military is not what the rest of us have here as civilians. It's to maximize good order, morale, and discipline, the body, so that we can increase the lethality of our military to protect the full panoply of constitutional rights for the rest of us. I don't even know where to begin in the 98 seconds I've got left, but just yesterday, a young man came to us who's a highly decorated Army combat soldier. He had been ordered to celebrate Christmas in the workplace. Ordered. What do you do when your commander comes in and says, I just want you to know that my wife, Mary, and I, we're praying for you to find Jesus? The concept of sharing your faith and free exercise, you're going to get, remember, we have the no establishment clause. We have things constantly focused on the family, and Mrs. Dobson has pushed the National Day of Prayer and these prayer luncheons and prayer breakfasts. 69% of the U.S. military is Christian, but many of them are not Great Commission Christians. 23% have no religious preference whatsoever, as I mentioned. The military is an entity that survives on unity. And I understand that death and their lives are on the line. I have 3 generations of military academy graduates in my family. My son-in-law is an Air Force pilot who deploys continuously into the down in the sandbox. But you need to understand that there are limits, time, place, and manner limits. And we have regulations. We have, for instance, in the Air Force, we pushed hard for this, Air Force Instruction 1-1, Section 2.12. Leaders in the Air Force must ensure their words and action cannot reasonably be construed as showing favoritism to one faith over another or no faith. And that regulation, ladies and gentlemen, is complied with far more in its breach than in its conformance. And when you denigrate someone's honor, integrity, character, intelligence, and courage by telling them they haven't accepted the right version of Jesus, there's no difference between that and telling them that they lack intelligence because of the color of their skin or because they were born a woman. Thank you.
Do you need the question restated?
Sure, that'd
Okay.
be helpful.
The question says, if it's well established that military and government employees cannot publicly support a particular political party or candidate, why should commanders be allowed to share their religious perspectives with other members of the military?
So the question to some degree involves apples and oranges. It's talking about 2 types of speech. The first is political speech by a government employee laying out a political position. And the Parker versus Levy case that Mr. Weinstein's referred to is talking about that type of speech. It was an officer publicly criticizing the Vietnam War, which obviously was a different position than the government took. So the government does have considerable right to shut down certain types of speech by government employees. The other type of speech that was referenced is talking about a commander exercising his freedom of religion. It's different, and there are some limits, as Mr. Weinstein articulated, but I would disagree with exactly how they play out. So, for instance, an Air Force instruction says that military personnel, quote, have the right to individual expressions of sincerely held beliefs to include conscience, moral principles, or religious beliefs, unless the expression would have an adverse impact on various military goals that it lists out. And so the basic position is the commander does have a right to articulate religious beliefs, but there is going to be a potential line that's crossed because he's in a position of power over the subordinate. And so there's going to be a difference between mentioning that you're a Christian or perhaps letting troops know that there might be a Bible study in addition to a number of other things going on, or having a Bible in your office along with a number of other books. And those things have been held to be okay. But certainly if the subordinate gets the impression that their job performance, that their promotion, their OER, or any other type of review is at stake because of how they respond to any expressions of religious belief, then you might be into a more coercive situation. Now, I would add one thing. Freedom of exercise in the military isn't determined by what we call a heckler's veto. In other words, the most easily offended or sensitive person can't control expression of speech just by being easily offended or sensitive. So we have objective standards that we have to lay out. I think Mr. Weinstein and I agree on that, and I think certain examples we definitely would agree would be too far, and at other points we might disagree, but we would agree that these are important topics to consider and think about as we try to respect everyone's free exercise in the military.
And staying in that military vein, this question has been designated for Mr. Weinstein, and then we will have the rebuttal. Do you see a role for chaplainry in the military, police, fire department, or Congress? And if so, what role? How would you think General George Washington, who started chaplainry in the military, would feel about the roles of chaplains?
Did you all hear the question? Okay. To begin with, let me start with General George Washington. Let's remember that he was General George Washington and president when we still didn't have fluoride in the water and we had slavery. Women had no rights, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll just kind of frame that for the time being. Chaplains. We have a lot of chaplains that are in our organization. We have a lot of chaplains that we support that come to us as clients. There is absolutely no doubt that we believe and we see a role for chaplains. Let me tell you one thing that's going to surprise you. We do not think that chaplains should be having military rank. They should not be generals, in our opinion, colonels, lieutenant colonels, captains, and majors. They should be GS employees. We have seen the alloy, the inextricable intertwining between military authority, an officer's rank, and the cross. We have not seen it happen with anything else. I mean, 99.99% of the time, we are fighting fundamentalist Christians. By that definition, as opposed to evangelical Christians, those who feel that they can follow the Great Commission without reference to the United States Supreme Court. It's construing federal and state case law, and in the case of the Pentagon, or as we often call it, the Pentecostal Gon, the directives, instructions, and regulations that control there. So our concern about chaplains is that we understand and see that there's absolutely a role there, but they oftentimes, about 84% of the chaplains here right now are evangelicals. About a third are what we call fundamentalists, is that they often see the chaplaincy as a mission field. Now, I know that Theresa is married to a former chaplain, Army chaplain, but you do not have the right to basically say, although we won't proselytize, we reserve our right to evangelize the unchurched. We took that on back in 2004. No, you don't. No, you don't. Not in the military environment. You are not to be sitting there and viewing it as low-hanging fruit, fertile and fecund, to bring people back into the Christian faith. And like I said before, which Christian faith? Because most of our clients are Christians. And it's a very degrading thing to be told that by your superior, you're going to burn in hell. Question for you. This happened at my alma mater, the Air Force Academy, and the alma mater of 4 of my children. First day of the semester, a captain comes out, a graduate of the academy, and he says, listen, all of you, welcome. This is a science course. Welcome to Umpty Fritz 101 or 201. My name is Captain Smith. I'm married to the beautiful Barbara. We have 3 wonderful children. We're devout Christians, and if you're not Christians already, I hope that by the end of the semester, you will be. I ask you, by show of hands, how many people think that that's okay? This is their instructor. He controls their lives. He's a military officer. I hope if you're not already, you'll be a Christian by the end of the semester. Does anybody out there think that that's a problem? Thank you. Okay. I'm done.
Thank you. And would you like the question again?
Yes, please.
All right. Do you see a role for chaplainry in the military, police, fire department, or Congress? And if so, what role? How would you think General George Washington, who started the chaplainry in the military, would feel about the roles of chaplains?
Well, I was raised by a World War II veteran. My dad was in the invasion of Normandy, and it was drilled into us from an early age to respect the veterans and to applaud those that have fought to defend our freedoms. And when we were going through some of my dad's personal effects when he passed away about 10 years ago, we found a serviceman's New Testament from when he joined the Navy. And there's a letter in there from FDR that says, dear enlistee, if you're reading this, you're no doubt in the service of our country. As your commander-in-chief, we give you this Bible, and we hope that these holy scriptures will give you comfort and inspiration as you go forth in harm's way to serve our country. May God bless you, and may this book be a comfort and a guide, along those words. So religion, the chaplaincy, and by majority faith, Christianity, has been a rich part of our military history going all the way back to General Washington. In 1789, George Washington said, and this is a quote, "If I had ever entertained the slightest apprehension that the Constitution which was framed at the convention over which I had the honor of presiding," said Washington, "if I had entertained the slightest apprehension that it would ever hinder the ecclesiastical rights of any society, I would not have signed it," meaning the religious rights. Now, in 1769, in his farewell address, September of 1769, Washington was leaving office, and he said this. He said, "In vain would the man claim to be a patriot who subverts or undermines the 2 indispensable supports for democracy, morality, and religion." Now, the question becomes, in the service of our military, does a chaplain have the right to express their own personal faith? And if they do so, does it constitute coercion by the subordinates? And I would say no on both accounts. let me just say this. When a Christian says, we believe Jesus rose from the dead, we believe Christ paid for our sins and is the one way of salvation, in no way are we saying, or at least we shouldn't intimate, that someone who is not a Christian is a bad person. That doesn't follow at all. I've met many atheists and established friendships and conversations when I say Jesus is the only way, and they say, so you're saying I'm a bad person, an ignorant person? No, that doesn't follow at all. It merely means we're advocating a viewpoint with which you disagree. So when I've spoken at Fort Bragg, when I've spoken to the cadets at Annapolis, when I've been invited by military groups to speak, and I have men and women say, Alex, please pray for me. I'm being deployed and I'm afraid. I want God to comfort me. I have my back, pray for me. If we take away the right of religious expression, we're taking away something very dear to our service people that's been a part of our military history from the nation's beginning.
And before we go on to our next two categories, I would like to collect any audience cards that we have left in government and public accommodation. Do we have any cards from our volunteers to bring up? Do I see cards? Okay, great. If I can have them brought up quickly. Thank you so much. We have government and public accommodation, and I'm just going to take half out and put half in each bag. These are public accommodation, and we have government. Great.
Okay. Alrighty. One of my favorite topics. Mikey, start with your side. Should the government be allowed to display religious items, i.e. the Ten Commandments, on public property?
Okay. I'll give the cop-out answer the Supreme Court gave, which is, it depends. So, but more specifically, the line that the court drew, and we can differ on the margins, is that if there's a display of law throughout the ages, equivalent to museum display, and this was in one of the cases that went before the court about a little over 10 years ago. So you're displaying Hammurabi's Code, the Ten Commandments, and other things like that, then yes, you can display that. What you can't do is what sometimes happens, which is a judge putting up the Ten Commandments in his courtroom, or a courthouse putting up the Ten Commandments in front. Because then it's not even a close case about what is the reasonable perception of a third party. Let's be real, the obvious point being conveyed, quite intentionally, quite clearly, with no misunderstanding, is that this is a courthouse, this is a jurisdiction governed by the Ten Commandments. That could not be more blatantly a violation of the law in the First Amendment against any law respecting establishment of religion. You cannot endorse a religious viewpoint. If I have religion with 10 different commandments, if I disagree with some of your commandments, then I'm entitled to an impartial government. I'm entitled to a government that is not taking sides. And just as the previous questioner said, is it wrong for Muslims to get a prayer room but not Christians? You're darn right it is. Is it wrong for the government to side with Christianity over some other commandments? You're darn right it is. It's the same principle. Rights for thee, rights for me are the same thing. You cannot favor only rights for yourself to equal treatment, but then say, but I would really like courthouses to adopt my religious doctrines. It just doesn't work. Logically, you can't have it. And that's why very devout and very conservative judges consistently say no to that.
And we have 1 minute and 10 seconds. Would you like to clarify?
Oh, I'll elaborate, which is, I thought my time was up, sorry. I'll go further, which is that there are cases about nativity scenes as well. And again, the principle is it a neutral use of government property? So there are cases the ACLU has litigated saying that you have a right to put up a nativity scene if others have a right to use that public property, whether a school garden or area in which people can put up displays or political speech, or if you're on a public college campus where you can put up your Clinton or Trump or Gary Johnson sign, then you can put up something religious as well. I strongly support that, and Are there school administrators who get that wrong sometimes and think religion must stay out? Yes, but that's wrong. So I think that you get to put up nativity scenes if that's a display in a setting in which other displays are allowed. What you can't do is say, I want my religion's version of some holiday to be credited over others, and I would really like the Ten Commandments to be adopted as the law of the land. There have been cases enjoining those, but there have also been cases enjoining other religious adoptions as well. It's neutrality, folks.
Would you like the question repeated?
Please, yes.
Okay. Should the government be allowed to display religious items, i.e. the Ten Commandments, on public property?
I believe the Ten Commandments should be allowed to be displayed on public property, and I want to unpack a little bit farther something I said a few moments ago, that religion and morality are two different things. The Ten Commandments are an expression of morality. Now, the Founding Fathers and the framers had a deep interest in morality. Jefferson wrote about self-evident truth. Sometimes you'll hear the phrase, the laws of nature and nature's God. Now, when we recognize some moral boundaries like thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not steal, the recognition of these universally almost held ethical boundaries in no way constitutes the establishment of religion. I mean, look at the roof line of the U.S. Supreme Court building. And the frieze that is the roof line of the Supreme Court is Moses holding the Decalogue. And the care and the protection of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment says the government is not going to have a state church. It's been construed in our lifetimes to mean that we can't recognize what the founders would have called self-evident truth. Now, this has trickled down from 1973 to I would say, manufactured right of a woman to abort a baby. More recently, in our own lifetime, the accommodation laws that basically have said gender is fluid and I can identify as a gender other than my birth gender. We, in our quest to really not allow the display of the Ten Commandments or the teaching of natural law or ethical moral boundaries, objective truth, call it what you will, we really, and we're watching it every day play out on the news, we've created a society that is devolving really into a state of anarchy. Really, we are falling farther and farther into a state of societal chaos because we really don't have any moral foundation anymore. Now, let me say this. In his 1963 Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Why We Can't Wait, Dr. King predicated the validity of the civil rights movement on, quote, America's Judeo-Christian heritage. He's talking about our judiciary, even our Constitution, is based on the Ten Commandments, self-evident truth. In fact, the whole validity of the civil rights movement, that all people are human beings and there's no set of humans within our culture that can't have the same rights everybody else has, was based on for 2,000 years of Western civilization, this recognition of natural law expressed, codified in the Ten Commandments. And so we're not violating the First Amendment when we display the Ten Commandments, yes, even on public property. In fact, we're acting in accord with our history, with our Constitution, with our judiciary, and some of the greatest leaders that we've ever had.
Thank you, and I saw some last-minute questions turned in. If we have public accommodation questions left, I'm going to read this question. Please bring those on up. This question is actually directed to Mr. Moss. Mr. Moss, are you familiar with and proud of the speech zone limit that CU Boulder imposes on the campus? Should colleges and universities limit speech often in very small areas?
I believe there was just a law that amended the speech zone area. I've always thought that the idea of a free speech zone is a bit of an oxymoron, because if you have the right to free speech, it isn't the right to speech that, rather than being free, is deeply restricted to one area. And I'm about to litigate a free speech case about students on a college campus. So I've never liked the idea of free speech zones. What I'll say is this: there are zones in which you get to say what you want. Those are public fora. That's the plaza in the middle of campus, where you have all sorts of wacky signs and chalk markings and things like that. Then you have your math class, where you're defying the purpose of the math class. If you say, you know what, I, as a teacher or a student in math class, would like to talk about my religion instead. And then there's the middle ground. So I think there is in First Amendment law the concept of the full public fora, in which one cannot exclude any political or religious content or viewpoint. Then there's the limited purpose public fora, where perhaps there's a setting in which it's an event that's designated for speech about the election and it's an open forum. Or for example, this, if you wanted to ask me math questions, well, no, it's not a free speech zone, even if this is a public school, because this is a forum that was designated for discussing issues of religion in American society. So I think a lot of it depends on the setting, but no, I'm not a fan of the idea that you have to restrict your speech. Now, if you don't have free speech zones, then you need a little bit more ad hoc determination of when your speech is starting to obstruct walkways or damage property or interfere with others' rights. But I tend to take the view that the First Amendment requires a great deal of tolerance and patience on the part of all of us. So if you don't have free speech zones, then there may have to be determinations, well, this walkway is being congested by handing out leaflets, move over to the other side. And I'll add, though, again, it overlaps with the previous question about the 10 Commandments. I'll say this, too, on that. Let's say a college wanted to have the 10 Commandments. When you argue, as Alex did, that the 10 Commandments, he mentioned it's a non-religious code of morality because some just say murder. Well, he somehow omitted the commandment, thou shalt have no other gods. When you argue the 10 Commandments, which have very early on, thou shalt have no other gods before me, when you argue that's a non-religious code, I don't even know how we're debating because that's not reality.
And Mr. Moss, thank you so much. You have 34 seconds left. Would you like to add to that, Mr. Weinstein?
I'll try to say this real fast because Alex mentioned about maybe we just ran across some Christians that were unkind. What do you do in a military context when they quote John 3:36? Those who accept Christ get everlasting life, and those who don't have the wrath of God on them forever. Or they quote the parable of the pounds in their perspective, Luke 19:27. Jesus says, go out among the crowd and bring back before me all those who will not accept me as king over them and slaughter them in front of me. Pull your Bibles out and look at it. This happens all the time. Is that free speech?
And that's
How is
time.
that within the military context?
And would you like the question repeated?
Sure.
Are you familiar with and proud of the free speech zone limit on CU Boulder that CU Boulder imposes on campus? Should colleges and universities limit speech often in very small areas?
Well, Mr. Moss and I are not doing a really great job debating each other because so far we're really agreeing on a lot of these constitutional principles. I would like to add to what he said by commenting that student free speech is a fairly serious problem across the country. A lot of public universities have either clamped down on particular viewpoints, which is unconstitutional, or they've had really narrow free speech zones. There's a free speech organization called FIRE, which is bipartisan, which goes around the country defending student free speech. Wonderful people. Colorado's to be commended because our legislature just passed a student free speech law that embraces broad free speech for students on public university campuses. The bill was sponsored by a Democrat. You all need to know that. It was voted bipartisan, and so I commend our legislature for addressing that problem. I will say that evangelicals probably feel that problem pretty deeply. There are contexts, as we've discussed, where evangelicals may be in a majority and they may at times make other people feel uncomfortable. That's not so much the case on the public college campuses. A recent study was done, and actually the study was trying to get at how much anti-Semitism there was on college campuses. And what the researchers found to their surprise was, from the perspective of college professors, there really wasn't anti-Semitism. What there was a fair amount of anti-Catholicism and a significant amount of anti-evangelicalism. I think it was 53% of the professors felt either coolly or negatively towards evangelical students. And it may have just been that they thought they were kind of stupid, but that's still a negative bias, right? And so for evangelicals, there's been some concern about the issues of free speech on campus. I don't know that we've totally solved the problem for everybody in Colorado, but this new bill's a great step in that direction.
Let me respond to the question, is the Ten Commandments an expression of religion or morality? It's long been recognized that there's an ethical code that has been known the world over. Societies, pre-Christian up through the Christian era, have recognized, you don't steal, you don't lie, you don't murder, you don't bear false witness. Jay Budziszewski, a UT Austin political science, wrote a book called What You Can't Not Know, where he documents all of the different cultures that have this moral awareness that is very reminiscent of, pictorial of the Ten Commandments. So we lose that at our own peril.
We'll call time.
The category of public accommodations, does it violate the U.S. Constitution to require a baker to decorate a cake with a message celebrating gay marriage if that baker is opposed to gay marriage on religious grounds? Mikey, why don't we start with your side?
All right, you want to go? I'll go. Go ahead. I think so. We've been waiting for this.
Yeah. Well, this is, is one that's in all our minds. It's a Colorado case. It's the Masterpiece Cake Shop. It's an interesting one. So there's a law in Colorado that bans discrimination in places of public accommodation. So Colorado defines that as any place of business engaged in sales to the public, wholesale or retail, and any place to eat, drink, sleep, or rest for pay, basically hotel, restaurant, store. So the interesting question would be if Masterpiece Cake Shop were instead artists who would paint paintings and never took commission work. They just painted what they felt like. Can the law force them to start taking on clients who want certain things? No, the law can't. But once they open up as a public accommodation, they have a door anyone can walk in to buy a cake, they qualify as a public accommodation. Now then they said, well, but we're really artists because we are cake artists. Now, okay, but if you go to Subway on their webpage, they describe their employees as, anyone know? Sandwich artists. Thank you, Tyler, my former constitutional law student and scholar of Subway. So yes, Subway has sandwich artists. And when I bought a cake for my 8-year-old kid at King Soopers, it said, happy birthday. Did I go up to the person behind the counter, paid minimum wage, and say, I am so touched that you wish my kid a happy birthday? No, this person isn't wishing me a happy birthday. I asked them to write happy birthday. It's several letters on a cake. So, and that's why Masterpiece Cake, as the shop, hardly disagreed. Look at the facts of the case. They did not deny that they qualify as a public accommodation. That's page 3, paragraph 7 of the Court of Appeals opinion against them. Instead, they were arguing that even though we are a public accommodation, not private artists who do what we will and don't open up to the public, they said, we get an exemption from all civil rights laws if we don't want to sell to you because, frankly, we hate you. Now, this has been covered. No, they don't hate them, of course not. So this was covered in the early civil rights cases in the 1960s, the exact same argument. Defendant who owns a restaurant contend that the Civil Rights Act, passed in 1964, violated his freedom of religion since his, quote, since his religious beliefs compel him to oppose any integration of the races. In Loving v. Virginia about interracial marriage, a judge who didn't want to marry them said, quote, Almighty God created the races white, black, yellow, Malay, and red and placed them on separate continents. But for the interference with his arrangement, there will be no cause for such marriages. The fact that he separated the races shows he did not intend for the races to mix. There is no neutral principle of law that lets Masterpiece Cake say, I don't want to sell a congratulations cake to the gay couple, but that lets, frankly, any civil rights law exist. Because if they get their exemption, there is literally nobody who can go to court and say, I get that there's a law against discrimination, but it's all a balancing, as Theresa said. So I have deeply held beliefs, and under the First Amendment, your deeply held secular beliefs can qualify as having the same religion protection. So I want an exemption, and then everybody gets an exemption, then we don't have these laws. So if you open up for commerce, you can't discriminate. That's just the way the commerce works in America.
Well, as Mr. Moss says, this is an interesting and complicated case. The question got to whether the holding in the case violated the constitutional rights of the baker. And the answer in this type of case is it depends, because it depends on which standard gets applied. So under state law, which is where we are with this case, First Amendment rights normally no longer get strict scrutiny, which is a high standard of review requiring the government to have a compelling interest. Normally it's rational basis, and that's what the court used here. But there can be an exception to that if there's a hybrid right, meaning there's two constitutional rights involved, or if there's another constitutional right. And so what the Baker is arguing is that there is a second constitutional right, which is the free speech right, the compelled speech issue. And if you want to think of a parallel, for instance, the dress designers who declined to provide dresses for the Trump family for the inauguration, they didn't want to prostitute their art for a cause they didn't believe in. Or sometimes musicians have refused to license songs for a political convention where they didn't agree with the principle of the convention. So the ACLU's general position on speech is, quote, "A free society is based on the principle that each and every individual has the right to decide what art or entertainment he or she wants or does not want to receive and create." Now, obviously, Mr. Moss is arguing that because someone commissioned the art, that right goes away. And we may find out if the Supreme Court grants cert on the case. You know, right now we're not sure. So these are the complexities here. If the review is only rational basis, it would appear that the religious free exercise rights can't be exercised. So I want to add a further point here. If we were operating under federal law, it would be controlled by the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which would return us to the strict scrutiny that we had before the Employment Division case I mentioned that gave us rational basis scrutiny. Many states have a Religious Freedom Restoration Act statute. Colorado's not one of them. So one of our collective decisions as a state may end up being, do we feel that religious freedom deserves protection to the extent that we should enact what lawyers call mini RFRAs in order to protect free exercise in the states? And so that's the 3-minute intertwining of my view of the constitutional doctrines here.
And if nobody objects, we'll continue this for another round since it's literally in our backyard here, this question. Scott, a quick follow-up. Under your analysis, if somebody walked into Masterpiece Bakery and was an atheist and asked the baker to make a cake and asked the baker to write on top, Jesus Christ was a fraud, would the baker be required to do that?
So this case law in other states, there was something close to that in Kentucky. I don't remember the exact specifics, but basically it depends on what their line of business is. If I have a website that sells t-shirts and the way my business operates is type in the text you want, our machine spits out the t-shirt, we mail it to you, then you can't exclude a certain message if it is excluding a particular group. It would depend on whether the state's public accommodation law covers discrimination based on religion in consumer affairs, because Masterpiece Cake was about LGBTQ folks, so I'm not sure how the public accommodation law fully applies to religion, but what it gets to is that if your business is selling we print whatever, then nobody could fairly interpret that as your speech. You're not being compelled to speak. You're transcribing someone else's speech. It would be like a court reporter saying, I don't like that testimony, so I'm not going to type it. Well, no, your business that you opened up for is to type out what I say. So too with the cake shop. If your business is, we will print your message on a cake, then you can do it. There are exceptions for obscenity in, I believe, the Kentucky case. But if, in contrast, your business is you just sell cakes and you don't normally write messages on them, then they can't say, you know what, I'd like you to also write on my cake, because then you're being asked to do something you don't normally sell for a living. So that's, I think, the gist of it. As I see it. Mike, if you want to.
Well, look, we've had some of these even in the military. The bottom line here, when you cut down to the bottom of the cake, right, is the problem is that the book, as many of you in this room interpret it, the book says being gay is a choice. It's a choice to join with Satan, hate the sin, love the sinner, and we cannot stand that. And if somehow this is okay, Well, this invalidates the book, if there's one thing, because the book is inviolable. And even though the fact that the book also states that if you have mouthy teenagers under Leviticus, you should stone them at the city gate to death. So let's just cut to I understand the concept of lesbianism, LGBTQ. We have a situation now with a new commandant coming in to the Air Force Academy, is a brilliant woman, Brigadier General Select. She and her wife and her 2 children will soon be taking over there. And this has caused a tremendous row about, my gosh, this is a general, and what kind of example is she setting? And so when we're talking about accommodation, as I said before, you need to ask yourselves on this Tuesday evening, have people really did she really make a choice that she'd have a faster path to general by expressing her love for a woman? And she didn't even realize what her sexuality was until she was past the don't ask, don't tell deadline. So when that kicked in, the bottom line is that really a choice to be with Satan, or is that possibly, as Lady Gaga says, that is the way that you were born? And I'm not talking about being in prison where you're gay for the stay. I'm talking about a human being the way that you are. You need to ask these questions, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
So a good bit of what Mr. Moss was talking about here was the question of what is speech, and whether a company can be compelled to provide speech if it's generally in the business of providing speech. Another recent case, Hands-On Originals, the owners refused to print T-shirts for the Lexington Pride Festival because doing that conflicted with their Christian values. The speech involved was fairly innocuous in some ways. It just mentioned the festival, so there weren't any obscenities or that type of thing. But they felt in good conscience they couldn't do it, and the court agreed that that would have been compelled speech, and indeed they didn't need to do it. So then we get to the obviously more difficult question: is a work of art celebrating a wedding, conveying some kind of expressive message, or not? And we don't really know yet because the Supreme Court hasn't taken up those cases. Obviously, I'm arguing that it is. I feel pretty strongly about all types of art as forms of expression by the artist, but I think you can easily see that there's room for healthy disagreement on this topic.
There are a number of businesses that have signs up, like the McDonald's in downtown Colorado Springs, that says we reserve the right to refuse service to any person. The question at hand is, does a business owner who has religious convictions that conflict with the request of a customer, does that business owner have the right to deny a good or a service based on their religious convictions? As it's been traditionally understood legally, the religious convictions end when or the right to express the religious convictions end when they do appreciable harm to the person in question. Now, I know that many people would find this odious, and in this hyper-tolerant, very entitled culture in which we live, people want to be able to demand that I will have service, whether you like it or not, you will serve me. But look, if they don't get the cake at one baker, they can get the cake at another baker. If the business owner, the photographer, the florist, the baker, the T-shirt printer has the right to refuse service, not out of malice, not out of ill will, not out of the desire to do harm to another, but simply the desire to not violate what they believe they're standing to be before their God, doesn't mean that they've denied an immutable right that a person possesses. Doesn't mean that they've withheld the right of the customer or the potential customer to go elsewhere and get the good or the service. And so I would maintain that even though sometimes it might go against what we believe, we should reserve the right of business owners to conduct their business based on their convictions.
That will be time. Thank you. Along these lines of public accommodation, this is a great follow-up, and we'll ask that you just hold your applause until the very end in the interest of time. What states in the U.S., and we will go to the left side here first, what states in the U.S. have a good example of the balance discussed, whether a Religious Freedom Restoration Act law or other?
Can I just say that I never thought I'd see the two of you be to the left of us, so it's great.
I've thought about that all night.
All
If you
righty.
turn around, it'll make more sense.
You want that again, or are you good to go with that? Which state has a good example?
You know, in 1993 in Vienna, Virginia, when then President Bill Clinton announced the first Religious Freedom Restoration Act, he said, he was speaking at a high school, and he said, freedom of religion is our first, most fundamental right. And I would agree. I would agree with that. And again, our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, our laws, our culture really make no sense when these rights are curtailed, if not eliminated. Let me just say this. I've got a lot of experience interacting with public schools. On both sides of my family, my dad's side and my mother's side, we come from a long line of public school teachers. When even one lawsuit is threatened, or when even one conflict arises and it makes the local paper, public school administrators are just, they're very nervous Nellies. And I think about the rich tapestry of not only religious history, but American history that students have not been allowed to know about because many school administrators are so fearful that if they allow an expression of Christmas, or if they allow students to say Easter rather than spring break, or if they say Christmas, the feared C word, rather than winter solstice, you know, there's going to be a lawsuit, or there's going to be some threat of some public scandal. I meet young people that they don't know about Martin Luther, and that this year, 2017, is the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation. Friend, you cannot understand Western Civ. You can't understand things like everything from the Magna Carta to the Federalist Papers to the Constitution unless you understand the milieu, the backdrop that brought us to where we are in history. And what our students and our culture at large has become is less informed, less inspired, less passionate, less equipped to defend the liberties, the freedoms that have given us the safest, most prosperous, most enviable nation in the world, because out of the quest that nobody be offended and nobody be coerced, we've squelched not only religious speech, free speech, and I would say the future of our country and the beneficence and well-being of people hang in the balance because of that. We don't want to coerce anybody. We don't want to infringe on anybody's rights, but we must be allowed to freely express. Now, which states are honoring that freedom? I don't know, but not nearly enough.
Just quickly, I think about 20 states or so have a mini RFRA. I don't know all those statutes, but what I would say is that if the more closely modeled they are on the federal RFRA, the better, because the federal RFRA was a very strong bipartisan approach that involves a sensible balancing test so that you weigh the rights out against each other.
And on the right, if you would like to reply.
So without delving into the nuance of state law that we're all hinting that we actually don't know, so sorry about that, but I didn't do my 50-state survey of this before. But as a general matter, I think there's less disagreement than some of the frankly paranoia I'm hearing would indicate. So the idea that you can't say anything for fear of offending people is just not the law, and it's not even what the left asserts. So let me read you some ACLU press releases. ACLU of New Jersey joins lawsuit supporting second graders' right to sing Awesome God at talent show. ACLU supports right of students to distribute Christian literature at school. ACLU files appeal on behalf of Christian prisoner barred from preaching at religious services. ACLU supports students' right in Colorado from wearing Christian symbols to school. A Colorado Springs school said you had to wear them underneath clothing. And finally, my favorite meta one, ACLU tells high school to allow students to protest ACLU at football game. So, forget whether I agree with you. Don't worry, Christian conservatives. Don't worry, Alex. Your disproportionately Jewish liberal lawyers at the ACLU are on it. And you can look at ACLUfightsforChristians.com. It's a website I just found. I don't know who did it, but it links to actual ACLU press releases. So I have no idea what country you're talking about when you say that there is actually a law in America that you can't express yourself as a Christian at school. It's just not the law. And again, back to 10 Commandments, it drives me a little nuts. If you think that the 10 Commandments that says, thou shalt have no other God is not religious, I have trouble dealing with reality with you. But if you think that's okay, if you think a courtroom can say, thou shalt have no other gods, then logically, your position is that a courthouse and a courtroom can have a sign that says, thou shalt have no gods, Alex. You may have no gods in this courtroom. And you would be the first one to cry this is discrimination against Christians. Heck, most of your examples are less bad than the sign that says, thou shalt have no gods. So at some point, you need to take seriously, everybody, the idea that you can't say that we can have the 10 Commandments because it's not religious. That's just not going to be taken seriously by any judge, and thankfully has not been. And secondly, if you're saying that's okay, then you got to concede that atheists can shut you down in a way that doesn't actually get permissible in America. It's only permissible in Alex's world, in which Christians are the most persecuted group in America. I can assure you that if you actually talk to some Muslim folks or some gay and lesbian folks, it is actually not harder to be Christian in America than it is to be LGBT. If you find me a case of a Christian who isn't sold a cake, if you find me hate crimes against Christians on par with LGBT folks, if you find something akin to what is happening to Muslims, I don't know, all over the place all the time, then, I'll buy you a beer. But you'd think we live in a country where we would think someday perhaps we might have a Christian president someday, rather than a country in which we've had, 45, although I know Alex is on record disagreeing about Obama, and perhaps we could disagree about Thomas Jefferson.
Well, actually, we've got one last question we have time for before closing remarks. If you'd like to address something in your closing remarks, you may.
And before this last question, I just want to say I don't have the privilege of coming to CCU as often as I'd like, but everything I've ever been to here has been first class, world class. Tonight's no exception. And I'm sure it's the same for everybody else here. You cannot walk onto this campus without feeling the presence of Senator Armstrong, and I think he'd be very proud of the high level at which this debate has been conducted tonight by both sides. So thank you to everyone here for that. And this is whoever submitted this, tremendous way to kind of overarch the end of this. Can you please explain where the idea of separation of church and state started, since it's not in the Constitution specifically? Mikey, do you guys want to?
Yeah, I get this a lot wherever I go around the country. Gee, Mr. Weinstein, you're so misguided because it doesn't say separation of church and state in the First Amendment. And it doesn't say that. And you can make an argument that America was in fact, established and founded as a Christian nation. I'll say it right now. America probably was founded as a Christian nation, but not the United States of America. They had religious freedom in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. You were free to leave if you didn't believe the way the Puritans did. That's the bottom line. So to be careful before you clap too quickly. Let me ask you something. If you get arrested and you're tried for a crime, do you have the right to a fair, speedy, and public trial? Raise your hand if you think you do. All right? And what gives you that right? The Constitution, raise your hand. No. You're wrong. The Constitution gives you a public and a speedy trial, but not a fair trial. There was a Supreme Court case involving Gideon that did that. Your Miranda rights. I've had people tell me that there's the Miranda clause in the Constitution. No. We have something called judicial review, and not every time that a judge, construes the Constitution does it mean that it's judicial activism. It's the concept of saying that it's not in the Constitution is as patently ridiculous as saying that a pig can fly, because this is exactly all the case law that Theresa's talked about tonight, that my colleague has talked about tonight, and I know that Alex is not a lawyer, but the things we've talked about are based, we are a nation of laws. And in this country, and I mean no offense, Christianity is not given any particular, by our law, special place higher on a podium than any other faith, including Satanism, atheism, agnosticism, secularism. We are not a Christian republic any more than we are a Jewish republic. We are a secular, a democratic republic, and that's what's so wonderful about us. I think to sit there and make that argument is completely specious when I hear it, that it's not in the Constitution. It's as ridiculous as anything I can think about. Jon Stewart said something great shortly after the election that made me love this country even that much more, and that's the fact that we're the first time in recorded human history that we created a republic not based on Christianity or in Judaism. That is not our perspective at all, but we tried to break down the barriers of tribalism. We tried to create a group of people that came from many different places, and we're doing that tonight at CCU. And we're not always great about it. We fought a civil war over this. You know, if you read A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn, and you look at the perspective of this country from women, from people of color, from Native Americans, from people that ran trade unions, you see a very different perspective. And I need to tell you how insulting it is to be told that if you don't accept a particular version of the gospel of Jesus Christ, it's okay, you can make your choice, you are less of a person. No, wait a minute. You are less of a person. And it's insulting, it's degrading, and it happens a lot. And so my heart doesn't break, other than the fact that we are all equal and we should be acting that way. Thank you.
Nobody's saying that. You have worth, value, and dignity as a human being. And if someone doesn't believe in Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, I as a Christian am sorry for that, because I do believe that compelling lines of evidence show the truth of Christianity. But no Christian, and I have interacted with a lot of them and stayed in some of the most right-wing places you can imagine, I've never heard anybody disparage or dehumanize or say degrading things. And if people on an individual basis have. So we're not saying that. But what we are saying is that, yes, this nation was founded on Christian values, biblical values, the Judeo-Christian worldview. Time magazine, 1954, Supreme Court Chief Justice Earl Warren said this, quote, "No one can read the history of our country without realizing that the good book and the spirit of the Savior have been from the beginning our guiding genius. And I believe as long as we follow them, no great harm can come to us," end of quote. Now that is certainly no evangelical preacher talking. That's, at the time, the highest judicial official in the land. And I think I speak for a lot of Christians when I would say, of course we agree that Muslims and non-Christians and Hindus and Buddhists and Zoroastrians and secularists have the right to their view. Here's what I would say. If you don't want to be a Christian, don't be a Christian. If the witness of a Christian offends you, I'm sorry, welcome to life. Sometimes things are offensive. But for goodness sakes, don't dismantle, don't tear down the backdrop, the milieu that gives you the freedom to safely walk around as a non-believer. You want to be a believer? Don't be a believer. But don't undermine, endanger the backdrop, the context that has given us the freest, safest, most prosperous nation, I would say second only to Israel under King Solomon, has been the United States of America, this great representative republic, and the foundation on which our liberties have stood, and we've enjoyed them, has been belief in objective morality and the right to express that, to live it, to practice it. And those things really do hang in the balance these days.
The American experiment was pretty unique because for that we had established churches in most European countries, and our founders made a decision to disestablish the church and allow religious freedom for all sects, including, for instance, Quakers, who were often persecuted at the time. And that experiment has really given us an amazing country where Protestants and Catholics and Jews and Muslims and everybody else have been able to live together and create a great society. I think every one of us who's speaking tonight is grateful for that.
Wonderful. And as we head into closing remarks, we're going to go backward from how we started, and we will start with Mr. McFarland for 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Well, again, I want to say how much I appreciate Colorado Christian for allowing us to meet here, and appreciate everyone on the panel. Theresa has worked hours to prepare, and Scott and Mikey, it's an honor to meet you both. I hope we can pursue the friendship. I really do. And let me just say, there's so much more that unites us than divides us. And this is one of the beauties of this country, that East, West, Midwest, Southwest, the Front Range, we can get together and respectfully, in a spirited way, we can discuss things. But you know what? I'm a Christian first, I'm a patriot second. Obviously, I believe in Christ and the Bible, but that blessed U.S. Constitution that people fought for, bled for, many of you are veterans here tonight, Mr. Weinstein, yourself included, how we, the beneficiaries of those that framed it, defended it, ceded it off to us, we as Americans, what I would pray, of course, I'm a Christian, I'm a minister, I pray for for the Great Commission, as Mikey referred to. But I pray that as a country we would unite. Been to 5 out of the 7 continents. This is the greatest place in the world. You can pursue your destiny. No caste will tell you what you have to be or what you can only do. No system will limit you. You're only limited by the size of your dreams and the ability to work hard and the character to follow through. So what a great nation we have. May we do our utmost to preserve and defend it, that our children and their children and generations on will enjoy what has been entrusted to us, the great representative republic that we call the United States of America.
And we will go to Mr. Moss for his 2 minutes.
Thank you. Again, thank you all for coming. I appreciate being here where my view is clearly the minority view, and that's fine. That makes me more appreciate that I'm here talking to folks. I get less enjoyment out of talking to the crowd that already agrees with me. I actually almost never turn down a debate from the other side, only when I actually know nothing about the issue. So I once did a gun rights debate, and then I got caught not knowing anything really about guns, so I should have just called up Mikey or something and said do it. So I will say, I admit I can't mind read. And one of the things that I'll admit folks on my side might be too quick to do is to assume that there's hate underlying denying someone the right to buy a cake, the right to marriage, whatnot. I can't tell you what's in your hearts, and I can't, when pressed, I should admit to myself, and I should be quicker to, and folks on my side should be quicker to believe that there is a hate the sin, love the sinner belief that is strong and that is sincere. What I can tell you is what it sounds like. When Focus on the Family writes that homosexuality is, quote, a particularly evil lie of Satan, if there's a line between hate the sin, love the sinner, I can assure you it is absolutely lost on anybody when you call what they're doing or believing a particularly evil lie of Satan. When CCU posts on its webpage proudly a press release from a couple years ago, CCU denies access right of gay activism group. It excluded a group that, quote, seeks to create conversation, spiritual, and academic sharing by bringing lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people to Christian college and campuses. You know, I get that as a private college, it is absolutely CCU's right not to have them on campus. But there's something deeply dark about posting years later. We want that to stay on our website. We not only regrettably told you couldn't come, we proudly told you you're not welcome here. And yes, Chief Justice Warren cited Christian values. He also banned mandatory school prayer, and that's where I hope some of you get to. Believe what you want, believe non-believers are going to hell. You just can't enlist the state in that endeavor, and the cost of living in a country protecting your rights, where the ACLU would defend Christians, is that there are civil rights of gays and lesbians and Muslims and Jews and atheists and others that you may not enjoy respecting any more than others enjoy respecting your rights.
Call time. Great. And Mrs. Sidebotham.
So I want to go back to the public accommodation issue. That's quite a hot topic in Colorado right now. And I talked earlier about the conflicting civil rights because we have here two groups who have legitimate civil rights and they're in conflict. And I think it's also important to realize that in a case like the bakery case, there's harm to everyone involved. It's painful, I'm sure undignified to be told that the person doesn't want to participate in your wedding. And from the baker's point of view, there's harm in the religious convictions. Two of the most helpful writers that I found on this subject, Douglas Laycock is an atheist who writes a lot on religious liberty, and Jonathan Rauch, if I'm pronouncing that right, is a gay atheist who's also written on this. And what Jonathan suggests is that he says both groups are so hardened in their point of view and so antagonistic, sort of this zero tolerance. And he suggests that we really start talking more to each other and try to understand how we can protect each other's civil rights. Douglas Laycock came up with a suggestion about considering what is the deeply held conviction that the person has. And so back to our bakery case, I don't know how it will turn out. The way I would suggest that it would turn out is that the harm of having to violate your deepest held conscience is probably greater than the harm of having to find another baker because you can still continue to live your deeply held convictions. But nevertheless, we don't want to minimize the harm. These are human beings on both sides with feelings, with lives, with convictions. And let's talk about it and work it out in love if we can.
And Mr. Weinstein.
This has been a delightful evening. I was, I didn't know how much blood would be spilled, and it looks like, so far we're a minute and 55 seconds away. We may actually get out of this clean. I wanted to say that I tremendously appreciate and respect people of faith. When I talk to, we represent many atheists, agnostics, secularists, and humanists, I always remind them, please understand why you terrify people of faith, because if you're right, we're nothing but a sack of meat on a rock in the middle of outer space. We're completely powerless about anything. The only thing we know for sure is that we're going to die, and that scares people. It even scares me. So I understand your faith, and I respect it. Please understand that what we're talking about here, Scott and myself, is that it's different when you look at a state actor, whether you're a public school teacher, whether you're a general, whether you're in a state legislature. When you're a state actor and you engage the machinery of the state, the awesome financial power, prestige and heft, it's a very different thing. It provides you with an insuperable advantage. And if you fuse a particular version of Christianity with this tremendous power of the state, it creates what is called an unconscionable or unconscionable toll, religious toll, or unconstitutional toll on a religious objector. For instance, Mellon versus Bunting, 2003, at the Virginia Military Institute. A secular dinner prayer had been given there since the times of cavemen. It was objected to by cadets, and the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, it didn't go to the Supreme Court, came back and said that even a secular prayer, a dinner prayer, in a military environment, because of the nature, the adversarial, communal, ritualistic, and tribal nature, exacted an unconstitutional toll on religious objectors. So please don't forget about religious objectors. They are your brothers and sisters. They're your parents. They're your friends. I'm sure we've all lost relationships over people that have lost faith or gained it. But please understand that we do respect your faith. We respect the Hindu faith. We respect all faiths. We're all human beings together, and we all came together tonight, and I think that's pretty damn great. Thank you.
And Mr. Kaplis, do you have some closing remarks? We'll give you a minute. How about that?
My mother always told us, never say anything that can't improve upon silence, so I'm done. Thank you.
Mr. Moss, Mr. Weinstein, Mr. McFarland, and Mrs. Sidebotham, and Mr. Kaplis, thank you so much. As the Fireline Coalition, we are grateful that you chose to share the evening with us, and we are honored to have you have this discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank all of the debaters one more time, and I want to thank also the moderators. But in particular, I also want to thank the people who have helped do the technical things. We have Kaylin who has been our timekeeper. We have Cass back there, and we have, oh my gosh, I got your name and now I forgot it. But we have a wonderful young man at the camera back here. CC, who's done a nice job helping us out with this event, both in terms of the facility and the folks who have helped us out with it. So again, one more hand for those folks who have run some of the technical things. And also want to thank CCU again from Fireline Coalition for this event. And the most heartening thing I think about this entire evening is that we have all of the folks here in the seats who have joined us for this discussion. Of course, ideas, when they rub up against each other, can reveal each other pretty well, and it's important that we have this discussion, and it's important that we have people here to hear it. And so thank you for being engaged in this, and I wish you a wonderful evening. God bless.